Welcome everybody to our March meeting of the Red Circle. We are very happy to have all of you with us, and we know we're going to have a wonderful presentation and a nice meeting. I'm Al Rettig. I sort of do sorts of technological things here and say hi to people, but without Peter Blau, well, the Red Circle would be a bunch of red squares. So that would just be that. So without any further ado, we want to say hi to Peter Blau, and Peter, take it away.
Greetings. Welcome to the Red Circle. That's our first order of business, to welcome you to the Red Circle. You have been welcomed. Normally, our second order of business is to ask everybody to sit down so we make sure we've got enough seats. We don't have to do that now, and we don't have to collect money for the dinner. So that allows me to head directly into our agenda and our guest speaker, who is Jerry Margolin. Jerry Margolin's been around for quite a while. He's originally from New York, and when he was a senior at Queens College, majoring in communications, he had his article about hansom cabs published in the Baker Street Journal in December 1975. He went on to work in marketing and as a photographer and an archivist. He escaped from New York, emigrated to the distant Northwest. He's now in Portland, Oregon, and he is a proud father of a son named Christopher Holmes Margolin. I assume that it was Jerry that suggested the name rather than his wife, Judy. He also has had an early license plate, 221B, at BEE. And he was bitten by the collecting bug, which is always dangerous. He had a splendid collection of Sherlockian books, which he eventually sold so that he would have room for his Sherlockian artwork. Needless to say, it's difficult to display your artwork when your walls are lined with bookshelves. And Jerry is going to show you what his house looks like now and some of his artwork. Over to you, Jerry.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whichever you are. I'm hoping that you'll enjoy seeing some of the art that I put up on this talk. I'll go ahead and get started. If everybody can hear me okay. All right. For those attending this presentation, your Sherlockian world is peopled by legendary names such as Gillette, Rathbone, Cushing, and Brett. I also, of course, know and revere these actors who have played and furthered the cause of Sherlock Holmes. But when I step into my home and look around my Sherlockian world, it contains the faces of actors who stand a few inches high, have sometimes oddly shaped noses rather than the familiar hawk-shaped profile, and say things like suffer and succotash, and it was a dark and stormy night. I'm speaking, of course, of the world of cartoon characters, a world I've lived with since I became a collector of Sherlockiana some 50 years ago. The era of Sherlock as a comic strip character began around 1940 in the guise of Padlock Bones and has continued nonstop for more than 100 years. The amount of cartoon people who portrayed Holmes-like characters would take a lot longer to list than I have time here today. Some are not well known and have come and gone quickly in newspaper strips and early comic books. Others, such as Mickey Mouse, Goofy, Snoopy, Popeye, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, have all become well known for portraying the famous detective as the men first named in my opening remarks. Characters such as Mickey Mouse started out in their own newspaper strip. Popeye appeared in Thimble Theater. They and others went on to have their own comic books, later appearing in cartoons, both in movies and later television. Anytime the theme of a story contained a mystery, invariably there was a mouse or a duck or some other unlikely creature wearing a deerstalker and holding a magnifying glass. What I'll present today is a sample of pieces from my collection of Holmesian artwork. Some pieces that have been selected have either been published or commissioned, and I hope you enjoy the tour. I thought the first thing I'd do is take you on a short tour up the stairs and down the hall to what used to be my library and now is a gallery room. There are more than 150 pieces framed on the walls throughout my home. And as you walk up the stairs and go down the hall, you get a little bit of taste of what's here. And then we'll enter the room. And this is what I deal with every day. I call it logistical engineering, trying to find space on the walls when a new piece arrives and it's frameable. As you can see, not only do I have it on the walls, but literally laying on the floors and around the floor on the wall, against the walls. I'm out of room. If you can see on the right-hand side, all those portfolio books, I have about 30 portfolio books that are filled. Each one has around 48 to 50 pages per book. So I'll move on to that, to the first piece of art. Most of you will recognize a Sidney Paget drawing. Sidney Paget was arguably the most famous illustrator of the canon in England. He did somewhere over, I think, around 300 pieces. Sadly, only about 30 exist. Most, I think, were destroyed in the Blitz and lost to history. I was fortunate enough to be one of those 30 people. I saw this drawing, which is from The Resident Patient, in the early 70s at the House of LDF, which was Lou David Feldman's rare bookstore. Lou was one of the premier, if not the premier rare bookseller, and represented the Doyle estate. Above his bookshelves, lining the walls, were most of all the Pagets that exist. And I was fortunate enough to be able to borrow the money from a relative to purchase this one, although it didn't go as smoothly as that, in that by the time I was about to purchase, there was a lawsuit between Princess Midvany, who was Dennis Conan Doyle's wife, and Dame Jean Conan Doyle. That lawsuit went on for quite some time, and in the interim, Lou passed away and I moved to Oregon. Years later, or a few years later, I got a call from Bob Frey, who had taken over for Lou, and he said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is you can now purchase the Paget. The bad news is, because of an auction in the interim done by, I think, Paget's son or grandson, the Pagets went for a lot more money. So the bad news was I could no longer afford to buy it. Well, I kept track of this particular Paget for 22 years. And after that, I got a phone call one day from a rare bookseller who said, are you still interested in the Paget? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, it's available. You have 6 months to raise the money. It was no longer the $2,500 I was going to spend on it. I had at that time 5 original Frederick Dorr Steele pieces of art, which I'll get into after this. I had to sell 4 of them in order to buy the Paget, but I had to sell them all at the same time. I had buyers, 3 of them dropped out. The one who didn't said, oh, that's okay, I'll take all 4. So I sold the steels to him. He sent the money to the dealer sent me the Paget, and I sent the steels over to the gentleman who bought them. He became my white knight, a person named Alan Mackler, and those 4 steels are now in the Minnesota Library collection, when Alan donated his collection upon his passing. This, as you can see, is a lapel pin, and it is known as the world's most expensive lapel pin, because after I purchased my Paget drawing, I had a friend who was an artist construct in sterling silver 10 pins, which I gave to everyone I knew who owned the pins, who owned a Paget drawing, sorry. So the joke became, in order to get the Paget pin, you had to own a Paget, making it the world's most expensive lapel pin. And those are the initials of Sidney Paget. The next piece here is by Frederick Dorr Steele. Steele was the most famous American illustrator of the stories, based loosely on William Gillette. And this particular piece is a preliminary drawing from Musgrave Ritual. It was done for the Limited Editions Club. And the dealer that I got it from owns the final published version. Now, the differences are that for Steele, it's accepted that he would cut and paste. If he didn't like something, he'd redraw it, paste it down. The final published version has cut and paste. This one is completely hand-drawn and has no cut and paste at all for it. This comes under the heading of right place, right time. I was looking at eBay very, very early in the morning one day, and up popped an original Frederick Dorr Steele drawing for sale on eBay. I didn't have time to write or ask questions. I just bought it. And it turned out that it was done in the 1930s for a friend of Steele's named H. Edward MacDonald, which unfortunately I've not been able to find any information on. And it was done for his book plate. But along with the artwork came also one of the book plates, and more astonishingly, the actual printing plate for this piece of art. All were included in that eBay buy. This is the unpublished Slobbering Hound. This was a piece that I had seen again at Lou Feldman's in the early 70s. When I came to Lou's office one day, there was two large cafeteria-length tables, banquet tables, filled from end to end with all kinds of Sherlockiana. And at the head of that grouping was this drawing. It was, of course, way out of my league, dollar-wise at the time. And I moved on to buying books at the time for my book collection, but I never forgot it. And then I found out that in around 2014, there was an auction that no one knew about, and a gentleman from the East Coast purchased this original Frederick Dorr Steele drawing and kept it until it went up for auction in 2021. And I've been through a lot of auctions, but this was the craziest one I've ever done. It was over in less than 2 minutes, and I just kept hitting the bid button until I decided that I had bid quite enough and told St. Judy, who was standing over my shoulder watching me, that I was done, and just waited to see what happened. And I was fortunate to have it now hanging on my wall. This, as you can see, is Spider-Man dressed as Sherlock Holmes. A friend of mine used to be a comic art broker who represented top cartoon and comic book artists. This one is John Romita Sr., who, if the name doesn't sound familiar, he worked with Stan Lee on creating Spider-Man. So I got my friend, I said, I live under the motto of, if you don't ask, you don't get. So I asked my friend, I said, can you get John Romita to draw me a Spider-Man dressed as Holmes? And he asked, but it went on for months, and quite frankly, I forgot about it. One day I got this in the mail. I opened up the envelope, and I was astounded to see this color drawing. Along with it was a letter that said, from John Romita, it said, I'm very sorry it took so long. I hope you don't mind. I did it in color for you. Needless to say, I didn't mind. This brings me to the 6 degrees of. As most of you know, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. This is 6 degrees of Harvey Kurtzman. Excuse me. Harvey was one of the original artists for Mad Magazine. I'm assuming everyone knows who Mad Magazine is, or at least has heard of it. But it was a magazine, a magazine and a comic book style begun in the mid-50s. And Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder and Jack Davis were the 3 original artists for Mad. In 1977 here in Portland, there was a comic art convention, and Harvey happened to be one of the artists there. So again, you don't ask, you don't get. I went up to Harvey and introduced myself and said, would you draw me Sherlock Holmes? There are 2 issues of Mad, number 7 and 16, that contain Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes and the Hound of the Basketballs. So he quickly drew Sherlock, and the legs sticking up are those of Artie Morty, his arch enemy. So again, I thanked him for the drawing and said, by the way, how do I get in touch with Will Elder? And he said, here's his phone number, give him a call. So I did, basically almost the same day, and had a very nice conversation with Will. This is another one that he did for me. Little Annie Fanny, of course, was famous in Playboy. He and Harvey drew the strips. This, when I used to go up to Will's house, we became very good friends and were friends for over 40 years. And whenever I would go to BSI dinners in the early days, I would rent a car and drive up to his home and spend the day with him and his wife, Jean, eating pastrami sandwiches and hanging out in his art studio. This is one that he did for me. Watson, you fool, you gave me a reducing glass. And this is the last one. Last Watson, we're on the right track. Now, continuing on, this was done for my son's birth announcement. My son was born in 1981. And I asked Will if he would draw me something I could send out as a greeting. And the legend on it wrote, a first addition. And then if you can see the note here from Will that he accompanied with the drawing. Moving on, as far as the 6 degrees, asking Will, by the way, how do I get in touch with Gan Wilson? Gan was my favorite all-time illustrator. He illustrated cartoons, books, had a very, very odd sense of humor, creating weird creatures and so on. And had a cartoon, 1 or 2 cartoons in every Playboy from about 1957 up till Playboy disbanded and there is no more. The piece here is the dust jacket cover to a book called Isaac Asimov's Sherlockian Limericks. It was owned by Otto Penzler of the Mysterious Bookshop in New York. And the joke became that every year I would go to Otto's store first thing when I came into New York for BSI and say, Otto, Happy New Year. Do you want to sell that painting? And then he would say no, and we would move on to other things. This went on for about 10 years. Finally, one day I walked in and I said, Otto, Happy New Year. Do you want to sell the painting? And he said, yes. So he quoted me a price. I made a quick phone call to St. Judy, who said, okay, go ahead. And I purchased it, and it now proudly hangs on my wall. This piece, I asked Gann if he would do a drawing of me and Holmes together. He very kindly said yes. Took him a little while. This came up. He asked me for some photographs of myself to use in the drawing. When I got it, I was a little confused by him putting a full white beard on me. At the time, I only had a goatee. So I called him up to thank him for the drawing. And I said, Gann, why did you put the full beard on? He said, I thought you could use the hair. And that was his sense of humor. He also was a good friend for about 45 years or so until his passing. This legend says, amazing Margolin, how your tender care has gentled the Hound of the Baskervilles. This piece is part of a pamphlet of sorts that Gann did for Playboy in around 1957, 58. Peter reproduced the folder for one of the BSI giveaways. At one point, Playboy decided to auction off their holdings of original art. And three of the Sherlockian drawings that came from that auction and from that piece that Gann did in the 50s were up for auction. I pooled my money together with Les Klinger and a friend of mine, Andrew Peck, and we won the auction. We drew straws to see who would get first pick. I got third pick and picked this one. I'm sorry if the picture is tough to see, it's a little grainy, but the legend reads, good Lord Holmes, you are a master of disguise. The piece that I really was hoping to get with first draw was this one, where Watson is hanging up the legend, think. And the saying is, that's hardly necessary. Well, I called Gann and I said, Gann, could you reproduce this for me, redraw it for me? And he did, down to the last line in detail. But I keep calling Andy and telling him, you got the original one, but mine's signed and yours isn't. So that's the standing joke between him and myself. Now this one is interesting, and it'll take your deductive reasoning to figure out who the criminal was, who the killer was. But the legend reads, I'm sorry, Inspector Lestrade, but for reasons which I confess are sentimental, I feel I must just this once decline my services to Scotland Yard. And if you can see the footprints coming in and out of the fireplace and the stabbing of the dead body with a cane and a Santa Claus hat in his hand, you can figure out who did it. Years later, this was done for Playboy, and years later, this was done for Playboy, which is the arrest of Santa Claus for the crime. I called up Gann and I said, Gann, I have to have this. And he said, why? He said, well, I said, well, it goes with the murder of the gentleman by Santa Claus. He said he didn't remember doing it. So I purchased it from him. And now the crime is complete. I have this framed together on my wall. This is considered to be what I like to say, the Sidney Paget of the cartoon art world. It's his most famous Sherlockian piece of art. And the caption reads, would you care to step out of the shop and see how it looks in the fog, Mr. Holmes? And along with it, Gann sent me a very nice long letter of his first visit to England and how he dealt with the pea soup thick fog at the time. And now the letter and the art are framed together. And again, going back to that 6 degrees of, This is a drawing by Sergio Aragones, who at the time in the 60s was responsible for drawing Alfred E. Newman. And again, if you're not totally familiar with Mad, Alfred E. was the main character that showed up on most every cover of Mad magazine. This was also done at that same comic convention in 1977. And I went up to him and asked if he would do that. We became friends through correspondence over the next 15, 20 years. And when he would go to Tahiti, he would send me postcards with him in a grass skirt waving at me. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of Alfred E. Newman. This was done by Ray Alma for me, and Ray was the last person responsible for drawing Alfred E. until Mad Magazine dissolved. Unfortunately, there is no more. And if you can see, there's a bubble pipe and a cracked magnifying glass that he's holding. Now, under the heading of if you don't ask, you don't get, again, I'm not afraid to call anybody. I'll call, if I get their phone number, I'm going to call them and ask them for artwork. So one day I called, got the phone number for Charles Schultz, called him up. His wife answered the phone, and I explained who I was, and she said, "Oh, honey, he's not here. Call him at his office on 1 Snoopy Plaza. And here's his phone number." I called and got his personal secretary on the phone and explained who I was and my Sherlock Holmes collection, knowing that Schultz was a big Sherlock fan. And I asked, would he draw me a Snoopy dressed as Holmes? Now, he probably got 1 million requests of draw me Snoopy, draw me Charlie Brown. But this one, I think, touched a nerve. And his secretary said, write it out in a letter and I'll just make sure that he reads it. I can't guarantee anything. And about a week later, this arrived in the mail. This is an interesting piece. This came onto a comic art site that I look at from time to time. It's from 1926. It's from the Second Stain. The interesting part is it came in a pulp magazine called Triple X Westerns in issue number 35. And the odd thing about it, though it is the adventure of the Second Stain in the magazine, they renamed it for whatever reason, A Stain on the Floor. And when I saw this, it was listed as not for sale. But I wrote to the guy and I said, what's your I don't want to sell it price? And he thought about it, quoted me a price, and I took it. So as I said, not afraid to ask anybody for anything. Here's a case of a gentleman, a friend here who lives in Portland, is a large autograph collector. And when he showed me a drawing of Harvey the Rabbit, now Harvey was the invisible character in a film done by Jimmy Stewart. Yeah. And I said, well, can I have his address? So he gave me his address and I wrote to Jimmy Stewart, who's one of my favorite actors. And I asked if he would draw me Harvey in a Sherlock hat. And about a week later, this arrived in the mail, Harvey with a Sherlock hat. Sadly, about 6 months after receiving this, Jimmy Stewart passed away. So it quite possibly is the last piece he ever did. And here we have Dr. Seuss. I'm assuming everyone is familiar with the wonderful Dr. Seuss. Now what we have here is the cat. I wrote to him and asked if I could get a drawing of the cat in the Sherlock hat. But what he sent back was quite odd. The cat in the hat shown here is his personal stationery. What he added, for whatever reason, was a hypodermic needle and the legend, Quick Watson, the needle. And he did sign it. That's his actual signature on the back. When he passed away, I sent a photograph of the artwork to his widow and asked if she could verify that this was his work in his handwriting and his signature. She very kindly sent me a letter back stating that it certainly was. And I have that on the back of the frame now as provenance for the artwork. This is Paul Galdone. If you're familiar with the books Basil of Baker Street, then made into, of course, the cartoon adventure, The Great Mouse Detective. This is the original artist for the original books series, Paul Galdone. The frontispiece was reproduced for another collector. On the left is Great Mouse Basil in his dressing gown as it appears in the first book of the adventures. The one on the right is my request of him doing Basil, recreating the frontispiece, but putting Basil in traditional dress. So I now have them framed together on my wall. Eve Titus, who wrote the books, was a good friend, and she visited here many times. I'm going to finish up to bring it full circle back to these two pieces. If you've ever heard of a cartoon character called Hawkshaw the Detective, it began with an artist named Gus Mager, who in the early 1900s originally titled it Sherlocko the Monk. And later in the 40s, it became Hawkshaw the Detective. These two pieces are really near and dear to my heart because they are fan art from the 1930s of people who were doing what I do now, which is to write to an artist and say, could you draw me your character? And each of these was, the one on the left was done by a person in an asylum who wrote to Mager, and Mager very kindly drew that for him. I also have both letters that go with each piece of art. So this brings it back around full circle for me to show that I'm not the first to be doing this, and it started long, long ago. I hope you've enjoyed all the artwork, and that brings this to a conclusion.
Well, it's a conclusion for today, but the chat just says, will Jerry do a second presentation with more wonderful collections? So more of his wonderful collection. So Ray Bessner says, wow, and everybody out there is cheering, clapping, and saying Dan Stashar says absolutely wonderful, and he can't put it better than that. Yeah, great job, Jerry. Really, really do appreciate it. And what can we say? There's just it seems complete. I don't know. It just does. It's really impressive, as somebody said. Questions? We have one from Tom Farris. Tom, I know it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but why don't you pop on and ask Jerry that question?
Hey, Jerry, what's the connection between you collecting art or cartoons from magazines that end up going out of business?
Well, I would prefer that they didn't, because Mad Magazine was always a lifetime favorite since I was a little kid. Playboy, I only read for the cartoons.
That's your story.
Sure, that's his story. He's sticking.
Well, true story. As I said, Dan Wilson was always my favorite illustrator. I used to grab my dad's Playboys and tear out the Dan Wilson cartoons. That's true story.
Well, folks, other than great congratulations and awesome comments, I don't see any other questions. If anybody has a question specifically, just go ahead and click on now and chime in with it. Otherwise, we will thank Jerry very much and proceed on to quiz time.
Okay, Alan, my legitimate my legitimate question here.
All right.
Jerry, how do we contact you if we want to come out and take a tour?
Any person any Sherlockian who shows up in Portland, Oregon is more than welcome. I guess I could put my email in the chat
Sure.
if that's,
Fantastic, thank you.
Ellen, I have a question.
Okay, go for it. Who's on?
Jerry, it's Cindy Brown.
Oh, it's Cindy. Okay. Hi. Oh, there you
Okay.
are. Okay.
Yeah. Jerry, are you ever hesitant your pieces are just fabulous. Do you ever feel the least bit concerned about leaving them to be framed, or do you all do that yourself? I mean,
no,
have you ever had a bad story?
No, I have a framer who has worked for me for over 20 years, almost 20 years now. He's framed over 500 pieces of art. The only time that I've never a lot of times I'll bring a piece and he'll just do it while I wait. The one time where I said I could not leave a piece was the reframing and reglazing of my Paget drawing. He said one, I wouldn't have left it. And two, he said he doesn't want it in his shop. He didn't want to be responsible for it, but he's framed over almost 500 pieces for me. So I have no problem with bringing it to my framer.
Thank you, Jerry. And Jerry has
Jerry?
posted his email address in chat. It's 221bee@comcast.net. It's in chat if you want to jot it down.
And as I said, any Sherlockian who knocks on my door is more than welcome to get the $5 tour. Sometimes it's a $200 tour, but I'll give a discount.
Any other questions? Just jump in if you have one.
Yeah,
Jerry?
yeah.
Without revealing any details, is there any piece that that has eluded you so far?
Yes.
Okay.
A painting of which I only know, there's a painting of which I only know 3 that exist, is by Robert Fawcett. I would love to have one of the Sherlockian pieces that he did for the Adrian Conan Doyle, John Dixon Carr series of stories. Unfortunately, even if I was offered one now, I couldn't afford it. They go for tens of thousands of dollars. But I do know where 3 of them are.
Nancy Stanley has a piece of art she'd like to talk about. Maybe you can solve her question for her. Nancy, jump on and explain that.
It's right behind me on the wall. The middle piece. I could take it down and try to give you.
Yeah, I can't see it from where it is.
It's a lithograph of Jeremy Brett as Holmes. Print number 6 of 250 prints of this. And I bought it. I got it because I made a donation to the local public television station during a fundraising drive.
If you're asking if I know who did it, I don't do lithographs at all. I'll amend that. I have 3 lithographs in my entire collection. I only do original art, and if it's a lithograph, I don't normally deal with it at all. So I'm sorry.
Should I take it off the wall and try to bring it closer?
I think it was done by a fellow named Vukovic. He did a number of those.
Really?
Yes.
The name sounds familiar.
That's all I know about him. But I have one of his, and yeah, I've had it for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is signed by Brett.
Oh,
Jeremy Brett signed it.
Is it an actual signature or is it printed on?
It looks like an actual signature to me. Let me get it and see if I can position it so you can see it.
It would certainly make a difference if it was an actual signature, but I tend to think it's probably a printed signature.
You know, it says on it, original signed and numbered black and white lithograph by Treshik, 1991. The game is afoot.
Oh, it's very nice.
Well,
that's a really nice piece of art.
Yeah.
Those particular prints aren't too hard to find, but when he did a tour of NPR's PBS stations, He did sign stuff as he went around from PBS station to PBS station.
Well, it was a premium that was offered if you made a donation at a certain level. I got this for my dad, who was a big Sherlock Holmes fan.
Well, it's a beautiful
And-
piece. I'd love to have the original.
Well, what is that?
You're a greedy man, Margolin. You
Yes, yeah, when it comes to art, I am. Peter
Alan?
actually Peter has one I'd like to have.
Yeah,
Well,
I know.
Yeah. Alan, I just wanted to add something. So you said he's a greedy man. He's also a rather devious man. For about 10 years, I ran the Huckster's Room on the Saturday morning after the BSI. And my biggest challenge was keeping Jerry out until everyone was allowed in. He was always first in line. And every year he'd come up with a new way of trying to figure out how to get in. And for one year, I needed to run away. And so I threw up a sign, which I wish I had retained, which was, no one gets in until 9 o'clock. This means you, Jerry. And kind of everyone understood exactly what was going on. But what I really wanted to show you, Alan, Jerry, I wanted to reunite you with this. Remember this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You want to tell it? It's your story. Go ahead.
I acquired a letter. This is a letter from Frederick Dorsteel to Vincent Starrett. And at the top of it, it has an original drawing of Santa Claus. Within the letter, he mentions Sherlock. And I owned the letter for many, many, many years. And one day I just thought, this is not the right place for this to be. And I sent it to Ray for his Starrett collection. And glad that
I think it's just guilt for all those years that you harassed me while I was trying to keep you out of the Huckster's Room. But
yeah, I missed that.
It was an extraordinarily generous gift, and I still am very, very grateful, Jerry. Thank you so much.
It's in the right place where it should be.
Ray, could you just hold it up again and then speak a little bit so that the Zoom system will
Sure.
switch to you, and then we can see it a little bit more.
Yeah, so you could see here, you can see the Santa Claus that's in the upper portion of it, and there's the very brief note, which I'm still kind of trying to track down what it is he's referring to here, but you could see Steele's signature at the bottom. It is the original. Yeah.
And here's a copy. Ray was nice enough to send these out. I think it's your holiday card. This isn't an original, but I don't know if it's clearer than the glare on the frame. Ray, this meant so much to me, man. Thank you for including me in that mailing.
Terrific.
Dana mentioned Jeremy Brett's tour of PBS stations, and when he was in St. Louis, this is a piece of original artwork that actually is by a local Sherlockian that actually is signed by Brett that was auctioned off while he was here. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it is a nice little piece.
Yeah, we see it very well. That's wonderful.
You should have told Jerry that it was original art.
Yeah.
I'll be contacting you, Joe, any minute.
Lock your doors,
I
Joe.
was say, turn on your burglar alarm.
Yes.
That's gonna be Jerry at your doorstep. Anybody else? This is great. I think the show and tell of other people's art is just wonderful. Anybody else with any questions or comments or anything you'd like to contribute before we get on to our quiz?
Jerry, how many pieces do you have total?
Well, like I said, I've never counted it specifically, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000.
Wow.
That's
Give or take, I'm not sure.
just remarkable.
Sorry, I have a question, but I couldn't unmute.
Okay, we're here. We hear you. Sonia, go ahead.
Sorry, I have to, okay.
There you
My
go.
question is, because I'm surprised, is Jerry, don't you have any catalog or listing or your possession with the
No.
detailed history of it?
No, I don't. I have
Are you
all of my art
kidding?
on my computer, but nothing, nothing of a printed matter where I would love to have a coffee table book. I've talked to Steve Doyle and Mark Gagan about it from time to time, but there's a lot that goes into doing it as far as getting copyright permissions and so on and so
Yes,
forth.
but you normally you are able to know exactly what you have and how many pieces you have.
Yes.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. Oh. It was somewhat, it was hurting. So
I know where it all is.
I feel better. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. Appreciate that. And ask Dana Richards to make himself known, because Dana has created yet another wonderful quiz for our enjoyment. And of course, it has to do with art. Well, we'll get started. But before we do, would you just like to give the overall explanation of today's quiz, sir?
Well, it's pretty clear in the sense that I have given quite a few quizzes over the years, so it sure helps if somebody gives me a suggestion about what they want to quiz on. And because of Jerry's talk, it was a thought that maybe art in the canon would be a good topic for this. And of course, there are many artists mentioned in the canon. And so the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask you about, I don't know how many, 13 or so artists. I'll first show you a work of art by the person, or perhaps by the person. And then I'll give you a quote.
Shall we move on to number one?
Let's move on to the first one. All right. This is an artist who is misspelled in the canon. Does a lot of bucolic scenes and watercolors.
Should we have a quote?
Here's the quote. He is a man with a considerable artistic side to his nature, a complex mind. All great criminals have that. Blank was no mean artist.
Okay, now, if you think you know who it is, just have that in mind. They're on the honor system, of course, because all Sherlockians are honorable people. Okay, those are your clues. We'll show you the answer in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So his name is spelled with an E, but not in the canon.
So it is Wainwright.
This is a self-portrait.
So if you said Wainwright or thought Wainwright, you give yourself a point.
There you go.
Number 2.
Now this is a sculpture, obviously, and it is by the person whose name I'm going to reveal. But I should warn you that it's well known that two of the artists named in the canon aren't real people. And this is one of the two that's not a real person, but of course you're expected to name the one that is given in the canon. A French modeler made it. He's good at waxworks. This particular pictured one is one that I think may have been made by the inspiration for the fictional character.
Okay, it is
Tavernier, but there was Alexandre Charpentier, excuse my French, who did actually do that one I showed you.
On to number 3.
Clearly a romantic artist.
And what did the canon have to say about him?
I mean, there's a question about that. So in other words, this was clearly a art that was displayed and was clearly correctly identified. Not a name that most of us know, but apparently Sherlock Holmes was well versed in this person because he recognized it as a genuine.
All right, next one, Dana.
All right. Well, there's not much I can tell you about this one. It's obviously a landscape. This person painted a lot of things that were not landscapes, but we needed a landscape for this picture.
You must come up with an answer, and we'll tell you what it is in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It is Corot.
Corot. Of course, our friend Paul Churchill was invested as Corot, and so everybody who was a friend of Paul Churchill should presumably have gotten this one correct.
Next.
Luckily, I was able to find a picture with a woman in a blue dress.
Because
that was indicated.
Any further clues, Dana, or are we on our own?
I think you're more or less on your own. This is an artist I'm guessing you know.
Okay, I think a lot of people will get this one.
All right.
Next we have, aha,
Again, I'm lucky to find a picture of a fat man in a wig, because that's what's indicated that we want to see.
I think a lot of people will get this one.
Yeah, the family portraits.
Yeah, that's a bit of that's a good clue. Yeah. The answer is, so score a point if you said Joshua Reynolds. Reynolds would be good enough. All right, next.
This is an artist whose name doesn't suggest it to you, but he's the guy who did most of his painting in Hawaii, and he painted quite a few volcanoes, but the name is not suggestive of Hawaiian.
There's our quote. And the artist is? And next we have, aha.
This is a sculpture that some people have seen before. It's a stand-in for again a fictional sculpture. So but this particular one has been several Sherlockians own copies of this one.
And I think this is such a famous quote that I think a lot of people will know who it is. And it is
Oscar Munier of Grenoble. There was an Oscar Waldman of Geneva in about the right time period, who seems to have mainly done sculptures of animals.
And that's one of the gentlemen from Geneva. That is one of his animals?
That is one of his animals indeed. We don't have an image of this man. I don't, of Waldman. Of course, I don't have an image of Munier. Again, excuse my French. All right, so here we have the next one. We have a woman tipping her head with her hand, looking askance at you. Again, it's convenient that we have a picture because that's what we're supposed to see. The picture of a young man with her head in her hands peeping at you sideways. This is a very famous picture in terms of being mentioned in the canon.
And it is by 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yay.
And next week, yeah, sorry.
This was that, I guess, I'm trusting my own memory here. I think that was on Moriarty's wall. Yeah, I think that was the one that was found on
Valley. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was one on his wall, and that particular painting was certainly not affordable by Moriarty. All right, so it was more than just a passing mention.
What have we?
I really don't know much about this one, to tell you the truth. In fact, I must confess I don't know why this one was picked by me, but the quote is very suggestive, of course. My grandmother, who was the sister of Blanc, the French artist. I don't know why I chose this particular image.
But you did.
There we go.
And I think,
it looks a bit grisly, I have to tell you. I do apologize for the grisly nature of the image.
But I think most people will get this one, and it is.
Yes.
Vernet.
Obviously.
Yes, and almost certainly the first one, not the second one, though the Vernet family had quite a few artists in it.
Next,
a lot of ink has been spilled trying to identify which Vernet it was.
Yeah. Well, this is a complex one.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Sherlock is the one in the middle. You don't happen to have a blank or a first folio Shakespeare without knowing it?
And again, I think
most people might be able to guess this one just from the image itself, if nothing else.
Yeah. So it was Raphael.
All right.
Now you got to explain yourself here. This one's a little different.
No, this one. Well, this one is by a very famous artist, and the quote that goes with it is, "It's a very good fake." That should be in quote marks. It's a very good fake.
Something that maybe I don't want to say non-canonical, but maybe that's the right word about this. You have to kind of think outside the box a little, I think, for this one.
Mhm.
But it is.
It is non-canonical. That is a Vermeer. And that quote is by Cumberbatch in the BBC series. When he saw that particular image I just showed you, he identified that one of the stars was in the wrong place for the time it was supposed to be painted, and therefore he identified it as a fake Vermeer. Since we had Vernet, I thought I'd try to sneak in a Vermeer and see if I can get away with that.
Last but not least.
This one is sculpted by a well-known sculptor.
Wonder who the sculptor could be. I love this one, actually. The answer is
Madame Tussaud.
Isn't
That is a waxwork of Madame Tussaud
I
as well.
love that. I love it. Well,
all right. So
wonderful, Dana. It's a fine tour of the art in the canon and a quiz in the middle of it. I think it makes for a great few minutes. A second really good presentation. Let's see how everybody did. Let's do it this way. Open your chat. There were 13 questions. Let's see.
8.
Whoa, whoa,
Ooh.
whoa.
Oh, now we're talking.
Who got 8?
Joe Eckridge got 8, I think. Stefan got 6. Okay, that's excellent. Very good.
5 for Greg.
In all fairness, many names I hadn't
Yeah.
even heard about.
Oh,
So
these
I'm
are
an
now
avid
getting good.
art lover.
We have 5, 2 6s, and an 8.
That's not bad at all.
2 5s, a 6, and an 8. 2 6s and an 8. So,
Okay.
Peter, I don't know if you can really split your imaginary prizes that thin.
Yeah, we'll capture all the winners on the chat log when we go off the air, but we have you folks did very, very well.
It is always fun to do a sort of vertical dive through the canon and find things like this.
Yeah, yes, it is. Peter, it's over to you to talk about if you have some prizes to give out, and I know you have some other things to say as well. Peter Blau.
This is Otto Penzler's library when he still had books in it, because he sold his entire collection. Anyway, as usual with our quizzes, there's no incentive to cheat because our prizes have no value. So we have your names. I don't. We will send you a valueless prize and our congratulations. And we are starting a new Red Circle tradition. Well, it's not new. We used to do it, but it's new to this generation. And that is, we're going to have irregular toasts. And our first irregular toast will be given by Mike Quigley.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good. So Peter called me up the other day, just a few days ago, not a lot of time to prepare a toast, and asked me what I would like to give an irregular toast to. And actually, Bev kind of helped me with the answer. We started talking about my new puppy, a 5-month-old Irish Wolfhound named Thorin. Some of you may remember I had an Irish Wolfhound named Murphy, but Murphy passed away last July. So there's only one Wolfhound mentioned in the canon, and it comes from the Creeping Man story, and his name is Roy. It is not. There's only 2 kinds of Wolfhounds out there. There are Russian Wolfhounds, often referred to now as Borzoi, and there are Irish Wolfhounds. And given the description of Roy, most people, myself included, believe that that Roy was in fact an Irish Wolfhound. And so I was thinking about giving a toast to an Irish Wolfhound, but you know, how do I make this somehow connected to this audience? And so I actually found a poem to an Irish Wolfhound written by Christopher Morley. And so I thought that this would be an excellent place to feature this poem to an Irish Wolfhound by Christopher Morley. It is called At the Dog Show to an Irish Wolfhound. Long and gray and gaunt he lies, a Lincoln among dogs his eyes. Deep and clear of sight appraise the meaningless and shuffling ways of human folk that stop to stare, one witless woman standing there. How tired, how contemptuous he is of all the smell and fuss. Asks him, poor fellow, are you sick? Yea, sick and weary to the quick, of heat and noise from dawn to dark. He will not even stoop to bark. His protest, like the lesser bred, would he might know, one gazer read, the wistful longing in his face, the thirst of wind and open space. A stretch of limbs to him begrudged, and there came a little dapper fat and bustling man with cane and spat and pearl gray vest and derby hat. Such were the judger and the judged. Christopher Morley.
Thank you, Mike. For those of you who have not figured it out, the reason Mike believes that the wolfhound was an Irish wolfhound is that Mike is Irish. So anything Irish, we turn to Mike. Our second regular toast, will be given by Verna Soot. Verna, are you there?
Well, Peter called and or emailed and asked if I'd give a toast, and I had to think long and hard what I could toast. And then I remembered that, well, at a recent Red Circle luncheon, Zoom luncheon, author Nicholas Mayer spoke about his several Sherlock Holmes pastiches, beginning with the 7% solution in 1974. From comments that were made, I was inspired to read his 2019 book, The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols. In the story, Holmes and Watson are sent to a small town in Russia to investigate the origins of a questionable manuscript. On the way there, they stop in Odessa. Watson is enchanted. He describes Odessa as inarguably the most beautiful city he has ever seen. It became the city where Sherlock Holmes sat at an outdoor cafe and calmly sipped his tea while watching 3 Secret Service men who had been tailing them dragged away in a chaotic scene that he himself had orchestrated. So I'd like to propose a toast to Odessa. May it survive the current unpleasantness and remain the beautiful city that enchanted Dr. Watson. To Odessa.
To Odessa.
And Ukraine.
Our hearts are with everyone over in that part of the world, I'm sure. Verna, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Verna. If there's anybody out there who can think of something to which an irregular toast could be made at our next meeting, please send me an email or send a chat to Alan and he will keep track of it and we'll get in touch with you. So many thanks for starting off our new tradition to Mike and Verna. Now it's time for regular announcements. If you have anything you would like to announce, send a message to Alan by chat and we'll get around to calling on you. But our first report will be by Greg Ruby, and will tell us about the birthday festivities last January. Greg, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. January 5 through 9 of earlier this year was the BSI weekend, which is now a full week of events. I arrived in town on Monday to prepare myself for what was about to come. Things really kicked off on Wednesday night with the first Ash Wednesday dinner. About 75 Sherlockians gathered for drinks and dinner. The first Sherlockian gathering of any real size that I can recall. The next morning was the Christopher Morley walk, where Jim Cox and Dory Nash basically lead a troop through downtown Manhattan, where Jim basically stands in front of a new skyscraper and says, there used to be a building here that Christopher Morley worked in. And then they wind up at McSorley's for some adult beverages. Thursday was a busy day because also that morning was the ACD Society inaugural meeting. Ross Davies had arranged for the presentation of the Doylean honors, with a doily picked out by as the honorees. And then that afternoon was the presentation of the exhibit, Sherlock Holmes and 221 Objects at the Grolier Club. It was a fabulous afternoon. You see things that you would never see in most normal people's collection. There was also a very nice coffee table book published. I now have a coffee table that I can put this on. It's still available on Amazon if you have not gotten a copy at this point in time. Thursday night, there was the BSI Distinguished Speaker Lecture Series with Dr. Mary Bendel-Simo speaking at that night as well. And that was followed by the SPO dinner, Sherlockians Preventing Oysters Destroying Earth, a private group arranged by Stephen Dorr where we go to the Oyster Bar at Grand Central and help get rid of the creatures that would one day destroy the earth, according to Sherlock Holmes and the Dying Detective. The next morning would normally be the William Gillett Memorial Luncheon. That had been canceled due to COVID concerns, but in its place was a much smaller gathering. I jokingly refer to it as the Will Ferrell Memorial Luncheon. That was enjoyed by those attendees. So we get up to Friday night, we had the BSI dinner, but first there was a reception. Julie McCures toasted Jennifer Olsen as the woman for that year. Later on that night, we gathered for dinner. It was a little bit smaller than normal. There were 14 investitures at the end of the night. During the course of the evening, we had Ray Bessner give a presentation on Vincent Sterrett and Ira Bradman-Teskey giving a presentation on Rex Stout. The next morning was the Huckster's room, and it's the first time in many years where you didn't have to deal with Jerry Margolin trying to be the first one into the room. The BSI did come out with 2 books that morning, referring to my notes, Music in the Sherlockian Canon by Alexander Katz and Karen Wilson, as well as the latest entry in the BSI manuscript series, A Masterpiece of Villainy by our own Ross Davies. After I'm done here, I will post links in the chat for that. After the Huckster's room, we all go to the BSI luncheon. And the again, a smaller affair. It was nice being able to walk through the luncheon this time without a line snaking through for the buffets. An up-and-coming Sherlockian was honored with the inaugural Susan Rice Mentorship Award. Congratulations to Peter Blau. And afterwards, Peter led the auction to raise funds for the Dr. Watson Fund. Later that night was the Lost in New York City function done by Jerry Kigley, as well as some other specialty meetings. And then on Sunday morning was the Ash brunch to close the weekend. So it was a great time by all of us who did make it to the weekend. We hope to see everyone again next January 4th through 8th for the BSI weekend. Back to you, Peter.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, now for some events that are coming up. April 8th, 9th, and 10th is 221B Con in Atlanta. This is, I think, the largest fan convention ever. I have no idea how many people come. I haven't been to it yet. Dana has been and enjoyed it. I don't know if anybody else here has been there. Chat to Alan if you can tell us something about it. On April 22nd, 3rd, and 4th is Malice Domestic in Bethesda. This is the local mystery fan and mystery writer convention. I'm going, Dan Stashauer is going to be there. Donna Andrews will be. We have no idea what sort of Sherlockian programming there'll be, but it's a great place to meet authors, get them to sign your books, meet authors that you don't know about, and that you will want to read. They start off with something they call speed dating. You go into a room and you sit 10 people at a table, and the authors go from table to table. The authors have 1 minute to tell you about their book, their series, and then the whistle blows. It goes, and then on to the next table. And it's a great way to learn about new authors. On May 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, the Sherlock Holmes Society of London is having their London Festival, which will include their spring dinner, which is now their annual dinner just this year, because their annual dinner usually is in January. And the House of Commons dining room had to cancel it because of the pandemic. So they're having their January dinner in May. And this is their annual event. If you're not a member of the Sherlock Holmes Society, they welcome you as a member. Do a Google for Sherlock Holmes Society of London. Their website has a lot of interesting stuff. On May 28th, the Adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes are having their spring meeting. And on June 23rd through the 28th, the American Library Association is having their annual meeting at the Convention Center in Washington. And that will be the occasion of our next meeting. The Red Circle will welcome the sub-librarian scion of the Baker Street Irregulars. And these are the visiting librarians. We did this a few years ago in a venue downtown someplace. We have not yet found an appropriate venue. You want to make it convenient for the librarians. This will be our second in-person meeting since the pandemic started. We did have one at the Glen Echo Park, which was very nice. And we're hoping that the pandemic will still be subsided and we'll be able to get together on June 24th somewhere. We'll let you know. And in July 29th through 31st is the Sherlock Holmes in the British Empire Conference at Bear Mountain Inn. This is going to be fun. This is the Baker Street Irregulars have events every 4 years. Started off with a tour of the Vermissa Valley, Pennsylvania. Now it's going to be a really good conference at Bear Mountain, which is just far enough north of New York to be affordable, but close enough to get to from New York City. Information about that is at the Baker Street Irregulars website, bakerstreetirregulars.com. In September, we've got BoucherCon 52 in Minneapolis. That's always fun. This is the really big fan for mystery readers and mystery writers, big convention. And later in September, on 23rd, 4th, and 5th, the Bootmakers of Toronto will have a conference they call Jubilee at 221B. They're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Bootmakers and the start of the Arthur Conan Doyle collection in Toronto. And then January 6th will be the next celebration of Sherlock Holmes's 168th birthday in New York. Greg has mentioned it's a very long weekend. It will run from the 4th through the 8th. And eventually there will be a lot of information about all of the regular and irregular events there. It is likely that the Sherlock Holmes Society of London will have their next annual dinner in London on January 14th. And on January 11th to the 22nd, if you did not see the musical Cats at the National Theatre in 1984, it's coming back. It'll be there next year in January. The last time they were here in 1984, the late Martha Irish arranged a very nice theater party. We all went to the National Theatre for a Saturday matinee, adjourned to a nearby restaurant for something to eat, and were joined by McCavity, the mystery cat, not in costume, but it's a great musical and based on T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, which of course stars McCavity, the mystery cat. And finally, in April and May in Cleveland, Ken Ludwig's brand new play, Moriarty, a New Sherlock Holmes Mystery. Again, he has got 5 actors playing all sorts of roles. And I like Dan Stashauer, he says nothing about what the play is actually going to be like, but we hope that eventually it will be here in Washington and I'm sure it'll be well worth seeing.
Peter, excuse me for 1 second, but I always thought that Cats was about a Sherlockian pathologist, but perhaps not.
I heard of,
It's
I
an
don't
old
know,
Mel, yeah,
Bob
it's a Mel Brooks joke. I can just before you just before you continue, Marcia Pollock sent a note and said, would we please just announce that the Scourers and Molly Maguires will be meeting on Sunday, May 15th, and Randall Stock will be the speaker. And she has posted the contact information in chat for anybody who'd like to pursue that.
All right. Is there anybody else we've missed? All right.
I'm just checking. Just a lot of nice people saying nice things about the presentations today. No, that's it from chat, Peter. So back to you.
All right. One more announcement from Bev.
I don't know if you can see, am I in here? Sort of?
Well,
Okay. all
off
right.
and on.
Off and on. All right, Jerry, I'm addressing this to you, but it really is to anybody. You have fantastic stories about your collection. And I know you have you have documentation about who and the what and the when, the where, but it's the stories that make your art collection even more special. Some years ago, Peter has wonderful stories, and he's a wonderful storyteller. And I was very concerned that if anything happened to him, that those stories would be lost. So a few years ago, I had Andy Solberg come in with a tripod and a camera. It took us 2 days to do it. We had Peter walk around his collection and pull out books and tell stories about different parts of his collection, so that we had a record of why he had that book or what the story was about it, what made it special. And so we have this record of him. And if you can't do a coffee table book about your collection, you may want to consider doing a visual audio record of some of your stories. And I would suggest that to anybody. It's not that hard to do. But I think this is part of the oral history of the BSI, if you will, and of Sherlockiana. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And if you ever get to see Andy Solberg's video, I can only remind you that all of my stories are based on true stories. All right. If there's anybody here who is not already on the Red Circle's mailing list and would like to be, go to our website, and there's a place to send a message saying you'd like to be on our mailing list. There we are. That's my Red Circle email address. Send me a message. We have about 300 people on our mailing list. Like membership in the Red Circle, once you're in, it's very hard to get out. So once you're on our mailing list, you're stuck. But if you really object, we can unsubscribe you. So thank you all. Special thanks to Jerry Margolin and Michael Quigley and Verna Suit, and hope to see you all on June 24th. Many thanks. Farewell.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Thanks for
Take
coming.
care, Alan.
Really enjoyed having you with us.
Bye, Peter. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. It was great.
Hi, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.